Hi, everyone. So, last but not least, I'm going to describe what is called by John Beebe the demon or demonic function, quite dramatically, you could say. Um, I just call it the role function. And as you can see here, we've got my now completed Model A with the role function just there. So, what is the role function, or as Beebe calls the demonic function? Well, as I said before, it's in the superego block, right? So the superego block is not valued, it's neglected, but it's also weak. It means it's a place of public public failure, you could say. You're not good in this area, you don't do well in this area, and there are lots of expectations on you to do well in this area, which you can't quite fulfill. But you don't particularly want to be great at it anyway. It's just, yeah, it's a source of just problems which you're going to have to deal with, unless, of course, you're freed from those problems by some way or means. Now, what I would say is that the role is always going to be the opposite function to your leading function. So that means engaging with a role is going to be quite uncomfortable. You're not going to want to do it. But unlike the vulnerable function, right, the role function is flexible. It's in the flexible column, not the stubborn column. So if it's neglected, it's not valued, but it is flexible. It's what I call a reluctant function. The demonstrative function, I described before, is also a reluctant function. So this is something which is actually adaptive to external needs, demands, and pressures, unlike the vulnerable function, which isn't. That's a computer says, no, I'm not doing it, sort of thing. So the role function, yes, you actually can use. It's just not comfortable to use. You've got quite a bit of energy being directed towards its use if need be, right? So you're going to try it, you can attempt it, you can make a big splash if need be to use it, but you're not going to want to make much of a big splash because you don't value it, don't like it. You're going to want to do it as little as possible, but you find yourself using it quite a lot because the demands are being made of you. So it's not like the ignoring function that's only used in very rare circumstances when the dominant or leading itself says it must be used or requires it to be used. The role is more adaptive to any sort of need or expectation demand made of it. Now, why is it doing that? Because unlike the vulnerable, it can see the risks and the problems associated with it not being done properly. So it's the sort of function where you think, oh, I don't want to have to do this. It's so annoying I have to do this. But I can see what will happen if I don't do this. So I've got to do it, essentially. And that's the idea. So the role function is kind of like a mask that we put on ourselves. It's the thing we do because we have to, but we don't want to do it. It's like the chores. It's the doing the dishes function, essentially. That's why it's so reluctant. Is you still do it, you don't want to do it. You'd rather not have to do it. That's the idea of a role function. And yeah, it's something which activates in certain conditions, not consistently on or off. It is more situational, right? But it is something which, yeah, you'll find people using. And depending on the circumstance they're in, they could be using it quite a lot or not so much. What I will say, though, is that with the role function, the way to not have to use it at all is when someone's providing plenty of your suggestive function, because that almost frees you from the ongoing struggle of having to do this thing with your role function, which is so uncomfortable and annoying to you to have to do. And that's the idea. The suggestive function frees you from that. Another thing I'll say, the role function has, because it's weak, the reason it's weak is that it can fail, in the same way that the mobilizing function can fail. It has a go, but it can also fail. What causes it to succeed and what causes it to fail? Well, you are more likely to be successful with your role, right? When the role is being blocked with your creative function, your auxiliary function. Because auxiliary function is better some helping out the leading, but sometimes it can lend itself to help out the role as well. It is the second in its block, so it's there to fulfill needs, and the role sometimes can bid with the leading function for the creative function to fulfill its need. The need it has is responding to external risks and problems. The leading function is setting its own, this is what I want. The role is, I need to do this. I need someone to help me with this. The creative function can lend itself towards helping the role. But that's not what normally happens. Normally, what happens at the role function is actually blocked with the vulnerable function. The vulnerable function is meant to be the function that is helping out the role. The problem is the vulnerable function is intransigent. It does not respond. It does not do what it's meant to do. So it refuses to help out the role, even though it's meant to help out the role. And so when the role calls upon the vulnerable function to help it, that leads to failure. So essentially, you take, for example, an ENTP, right? An ENTP can be assertive and direct if they need to. They're not always indirect and about opening up possibilities. Sometimes actually have to be direct and actually impact on that surroundings, because otherwise they will suffer in terms of their extrovert intuition later. They realize, oh, I have to do this. I actually have to do this now. That's so annoying. I hate doing this. I actually have to do this. But when they do that, they're going to use their introverted thinking. They're going to draw on rules and structures because they have to. They won't draw on the introverted feeling because that's their vulnerable function. And that was just their blind spot. They won't be able to make their extrovert sensing work at all using introverted feeling to support it. But they can make it work with introverted thinking to support their extroverted sensing. So that's essentially what happens. The role function doesn't work and fails when it's blocked with what's meant to be blocked with, it's the vulnerable, but it can be used to some degree when blocked with the creative or auxiliary function. So that's what the role does. So now this leads me back to what demonic functions are, which BB talks about. This sort of very negative, sort of almost haunting thing that you see as a very bad thing in your life. It essentially haunts you in some sort of way. It's seen as sort of demonic, nasty, evil energy, you could say. I think that's all very, very dramatic. It's not that you see it as evil. It's rather you see this thing as, oh, I see risks in this area. I see problems in this area. So I'm going to put on this adaptation I don't want to have to do to manage these risks and really annoying things in my life. But it's not something which you're blind to. So it doesn't trip you up so much. You're just not very good at handling it and you don't really want to handle it, but you end up having to. So it becomes a laborious drudgery of having to do that thing. It's always uncomfortable. You don't want to have to do it. And be freed from that ongoing struggle of using it, your suggestive function can save you from it. But that is something which needs to be provided by someone else because you can't really provide enough of your suggestive function yourself. You're not confident enough in it, you're not good enough at it, essentially. There's demon, right? Demon's a dramatic word for it. But this idea, this sort of ongoing struggle with this thing, okay, maybe demon could work. And maybe trickster as a sort of thing you can't see, which then causes you to trip up. You could say that could make sense, perhaps, of the trickster function in a similar sort of way. But yeah, I think the way it's commonly used, this idea that one double binds you and the other one sort of this evil which haunts you, I think is unnecessarily dramatic and quite arbitrary and not really clearly thought out as something you can reliably identify in someone. So, yeah, this idea of a role being this sort of mask you put on, I think makes so much more sense. So, thank you. I hope that helps and speak soon.